We're going to be this is our keynote discussion discussing investment within the film industry in different levels of infrastructure. You know, what does this what is investment in the shoot on location value chain? What opportunities are there to grow the investment in the sector, be it story funding, yes, indeed, but also like infrastructure of that kind of story funding, the other gaps and opportunities that exist, and how, you as the industry, how you need to respond when we need to kind of unpack these financing models and the other interventions. So to join me on this panel, I've got Mayenzeke Baza, who is the head of AAA Entertainment Distribution Agency. But in what he does, he doesn't just distribute content, he's also a producer, but also he's a strategist. He's an investment strategist and moving into a place where, he's looking at different ways to find money, but also different ways to be able to activate that spend within the value chain. Then we also have Kagisho Bapela from the IDC. He's a senior deal maker. And within that space of what he does, he's almost become a filmmaker, actually. I think Kagisho spends more time reading scripts than actually reading financial models these days. So he's become and understands the idea of story and idea of, okay, if this is a story you want to tell, how do we support you as the government bank? And then also from the National Film and Video Foundation, we've got Lehlohonolo Mokhosi, who works within the deal structuring within NFVF, but also has spent some time at the DTIC and been able to help us unpack what does that rebate incentive actually mean? Is it just about funding the film throughout and getting your milestones? But how can we actually start to change the narrative of how we use these systems and these rebates, and how we change the narrative of all these funding mechanisms and these soft funding versus private funding, and how do we go out there and look for private equity, and where should all of this be spent? We had hoped to have Tabang Porta from NEF, but unfortunately he's not able to make it today. But we'll bring him into a round table and make sure that we have a fireside chat with him as well. So I'd like to call the three speakers that I've mentioned, if you can come in through that side. You can give them a round of applause as they do walk up. Thank you.
That's why I'm waiting. Okay.
Are we gonna leave again?
Come closer. Alrighty. Everyone's run away from me. What's the one?
I have to shake the money hands. Sure.
Okay, so as I said, for me, this is the reason why, one of the biggest reasons why we do Locations Africa really is about looking at the opportunities that exist on the continent. And money is what drives those opportunities, right? It's money. At the end of the day, we are running businesses. These may be beautiful stories, but at the end of the day, just once you attach a commercial objective to it, even if it's 1 cent, it becomes a commercial venture, and you've got to make this business work. You've got to find money for it. Yes, we may have savings, but we've got to make this thing work, and we want to tell this story to the entire world, be it a fiction, be it non-fiction, be it literally even the TikTok episodes now. I mean, that's money, that's data, right? So it's an investment to a point. It's not just about the investment necessarily on a big project, but because there's this new wave of interesting content, I'm starting to pick up that even the banks themselves are starting to literally knock on our door and say, okay, you seem to be this kind of broad-based specialist in film. How do we start creating these financial models? And that's where this conversation comes out from, really. And tomorrow we're going to follow it up with a fireside chat on the bankability of the sector. So we're talking more the investment side. And when I'm going to just start with Kagisho. Last year, you gave us an amazing keynote address about what it looks like, what the below the line, above the line business looks like within South Africa, because your focus has been Southern Africa in terms of what IDC does, the Industrial Development Corporation, for those who don't know the acronym. But also you started giving us examples of what's happening in Morocco versus what's happening here down south, and the investment opportunities and what that has done. Egypt has a media city on the continent, which not many people know about, but I mean, it competes against that which Dubai has. It competes against, the studios around the world, and we have our studios here in Cape Town. Mauritius has got their, equipment supply. And there's also this bubbling under of, all of a sudden Tanzania or Zanzibar is building a studio, and Ghana's got the cinema summit happening today through to the 10th. And so they're talking about infrastructure in cinema and distribution, which is really important. But for you in this past year, what is investment in the film industry really? And what do you want us to understand with your money from the IDC? It's not yours in your bank account, but the IDC money.
Thank you, Azania. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. I think it's amazing how time flies. I was sitting there thinking that last year we were here trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
And 12 months we are here again.
Yeah.
And what I always find interesting that as a government agency, you must always account to the public in terms of what have you been doing. And I think your question is quite fitting to say, you put it nicely to say, what does investment look like? But the real question is, what have you been doing since the last time we saw you?
Yes, exactly.
So I think we've been quite fortunate, and we've been learning a lot. Because, it's quite easy to talk about investment as a banker without understanding the dynamics in the industry.
Sure.
And it's easy to design policies that are acceptable to the system,
Sure.
the establishment, which doesn't really speak to the needs of the industry.
Uh-huh.
And it's also easy to read research documents about what everyone else is doing and try to extrapolate that to a sector that maybe doesn't really function the way the other sectors are functioning.
Yeah.
So everywhere you go, people talk about Hollywood, they talk about Nollywood, people talk about the Korean model. Everything is about what's happening. And today I had a new term, talk about what the Western Cape got right. So there's always a reference point. But what I've come to find that the industry is so diverse and unique that you must always build a business case from scratch. So since the last time I saw you guys last year, we've been able to support around 18 projects.
Okay.
We approved more than $500 million into those projects.
Jeez.
One released in the US as a global release, US domestic. It still started paying back the money. The other 17 is a local production house. They've also drew the money, started paying back as well. So the good story we have within the building is that in film you can draw and pay back within 12 months.
Okay.
So now our investment case is starting to gain momentum now.
Okay.
Because generally the way they view the investments, the moment they approve, they kind of close their eyes and wait for the write-off.
Yeah.
But we haven't been doing that recently. So our returns are quite significant. But within that process, we got to learn that sometimes the one-size-fits-all approach also doesn't work. And producers are also at different levels of development as well. So what you do for an emerging producer is not what you do for an established producer. And you mustn't treat an established one like an emerging one, and vice versa.
100%.
So all those nuances of what we're trying to do, we're trying to capture that in our modus operandi now. But what still remains to be true is that it doesn't matter how great the script is, how great the creative element of the project is, if you can't sell it, we can't fund it. Okay, and that remains the biggest headache, because people now call the chicken and egg situation. And you are saying, no, sell it first, then I can invest in it. They're like, no, I need to make it first, go on cinema circuits, and then I can sell it. And the investment guys are saying, hey, these are not gadgets. The fact that you produced 3 bottles yesterday and got sold doesn't apply in film. So we're still trying to find ways of then how do we help filmmakers activate the market before we can fully invest in the process. So those are some of the issues that we are grappling with now. But the bottom line is the market has to be proven with every project before we can put money in it.
So, you touched on something quite interesting. When I was at Lehlohonolo precincts, digital precincts, here in Braamfontein, and I had a discussion with a filmmaker, and I said, we're going to discuss investment, and the big thing he said was, Azania, we can throw as much money as we want to into film and to the value chain, but if we don't support the infrastructure of exhibition distribution, your point is proved, well, the point of the naysayers is proven that there's no return on this investment, right? So I think coming to, let me skip you for a minute, let me go to Lehlohonolo, and the reason why I'm coming to is for the industrialist program. You had some experience working with DTIC, right? And there are programs that exist to help industrialize sectors. What is being done from the state perspective to help industrialize sectors? Because when we industrialize a sector, we start to capacitate it from an infrastructure development point of view. What is being done, and how do we need to respond as a film industry into that to be able to support these narratives that are coming out?
Yeah, so that's quite an interesting question. I think it comes up quite a lot. I think one of the things that often gets lost is understanding the role of incentives. An incentive is much like your risk mitigation type of fund. It's not a fund you necessarily consider at the beginning stages. It's a fund you need to consider when you know where you'll raise the full budget, your full money. So even with the industrialization fund, the Black industrialization program, it is there to actually correct a market failure. The market failure there was there's not enough Black industrialists, therefore let's put this fund in that helps them unlock other funding. So this becomes the fail-safe. So in the space where film infrastructure is required, the DTIC has actually made quite a significant shift when it comes to the critical infrastructure program, where they now speak directly to the building of studios, the building of film infrastructure, something that wasn't there pre-2018. So now post that period, they've now laid out the rules, they've laid out who can qualify, how far they will actually assist with the building of the specific infrastructure around studios. So the only thing I'm not particularly sure of is what the uptake of that has been. But it is there, and it was the first time that it's there in the entire existence of that particular scheme. So outside of the film and TV incentives, you now have an incentive that speaks directly towards building filmed infrastructure.
Film infrastructure. And when we look at film infrastructure, I want us to be clear about this. It's that thing of building studios and building studios and building studios, right? Is that what it's for, or are we looking at different kinds of infrastructure? Because the way, in my mind, I'm thinking is infrastructure in cinema. We're hearing now that there are cinema chains that are literally closing down, right? And that's because the finance model doesn't work anymore. It does. We're here on our phones and our laptops. We're at home. We're watching things, and we're in the comfort of our own home. We can buy popcorn and put it into a microwave, and that's where we are. Will we fall into a trap of having white elephants and consistently building these things to help the story along? We build a lot of studios and lower the economies of scale because we have more. And then when it comes to the other infrastructure we need, what's happening there? I mean, maybe Mayenzeke, you can jump in there in terms of exhibition distribution infrastructure.
Yeah, I think, thanks for that, Azza. I think from my perspective, so that people can understand, what I do is I'm almost like the middleman. I'm the guy who's supposed to give value to the product that's been created, because I'm always market facing. So I think Kagisho mentioned earlier that you cannot create something that cannot be sold. This is the one industry that's very hard to be able to create a product and pre-sell it, because you cannot see it until it's finished. and there's many risks. You can't say, I'm going to grow a potato, and we all know what a potato looks like. But when it comes to film and TV content, there's almost everything changes as it's being made. There's many factors that could shift how that product ends up in the end. Of course, if someone has made a certain type of movies, you could almost bet on the fact that they are good for making the same type of movie. But things could shift because it's very much human. It's about human beings, and a human being's mind can change. You can almost set a standard of how things should be made, but it's emotions and feelings, so those things could change. That's what makes it really difficult. One of the things, I always say is even our incentives, our funding is currently very production specific. So we have to create the product. Really, none of our funding is about finding the market or selling the product that we are making. If you look globally, from a distribution and sales perspective, the countries outside Hollywood, almost every country, whether it be Germany, France, the whole Europe, they all have incentives that are very distribution specific. So as a distributor, you almost get a rebate based on the sales. So a lot of those, what they call European sales, when the distributor pick up a content, it already knows that it can make its 40% back. Most of my peers globally, they have that in the Eurocentric model. Different maybe in the Asian model or Latin America, but Hollywood does not even need a distro incentive because they are a built-in market on their own. That business is built on distribution and financing before the product is being created. It's a lucrative market. It's already proven itself over a decade that it's a good market. So I think here, for me, one of the issues, or let's say one of the disadvantages we have is that there's a lot of money, to Kagisho's, there's incentive, but it's very production specific. It disadvantages the distribution and the sales because my greatest competitors from a distribution and sales is Hollywood or Europe, right? Some of the sales companies that are my competitors, they sit outside the country. Oftentimes, some of them have an advantage. Whereas here, we expected to be able to put a minimum guarantee or project that the project is going to sell, even though we know that the product is not necessarily market-facing. So you are faced with everyone wanting to make a movie, but they haven't really thought about where it's going to go, who they're going to make it for. Now, so that's always been our greatest disadvantage. But of course, we see now things are changing. There's what called global platforms that's starting to play in the local market with the likes of Netflix, Amazon, and many other, and our local players, where they are pre-buying content for them to exploit in their platform. But of course, it almost sets the exploitation periods almost disadvantage you from having any upside. Because what they buy and it's for that specific platform. Outside that, there's limited exploitation windows. So, and that's really one of our greatest challenges. What really doesn't exist, which for me, I think something to think about from a financing perspective is how do we then to start to create the project that we know as distribution players is going to sell. But who's going to take the chance to be able to put the money up front, which is an equity perspective, rather than a gap or a loan facilities? Because what's happening now, even though the banks are giving you their money as an equity, but you still need to be able to prove the market. At the same time, you still need to prove that someone else with the same equal amount of equity has a belief in your product. So it's not really as easy as it looks. It's probably the most difficult industry I've ever been in.
So, and you've been in many, farming and everything else in between. So I wanted to ask this question. In terms of the infrastructure of story, is it right to say that develop slate projects as an infrastructure model? Because you're building a business by doing that, right? So you're building, it's an intangible infrastructure. Am I right in saying that that's an opportunity for then investors to say, okay, fine, that starts to make sense to me, because if I'm able to then showcase that I've got a slate of projects, the economy of that story or those stories start to say that if you do that, then maybe the filming value chain, as well, we're all here, can start to have consistency in paychecks, as one thing, and then we're able to then say, if someone says, okay, I've got funding for 10 films, to then go and be able to take that and somewhere, somehow prove that an equipment house needs to be further capacitated? Or is that a way to look at infrastructure development within this film industry to start making it make viable? Anyone?
Look, I'd love to take that. It's actually quite an interesting one. I know Kagisho has an opinion, even Mayenzeke, around slate funding, so funding of slate. So what I found lacking, based on having worked in the various government departments, is that even though there is funding for the projects, where the filmmakers kind of shoot themselves in the foot is in the space where you're literally packaging a slate of 10 features.
Sure.
So all of them need to be either a make it or a break it, right? They're either a hit or a miss. But there's nothing in between to say, what's then my long-term sustainability? Why don't I look at series? Why don't I look at a fictional documentary series? A non-fiction and fictional series. So those become these will feed me along the way and will prove the business case around the packaging of the slate itself. Because you're still seeing the growth in terms of your platforms, your Netflixes, your Amazons and Disneys. They still have an appetite for the long format television. Linear television still has that appetite. So that could be these are what will bring in some income. And then as I work on these remaining 7, maybe 6 films, and that's when I'll prove the hit or miss in terms of it either made it in cinema, and obviously we're talking a dying cinema space, but has it made it, has it not, what are the learnings there? But from an investor's point of view, you're still able to say, I'm still able to pay you back because I built in kind of a buffer in terms of what that slate looked like. So there is definitely an element where that is probably the most profitable way to look at it from an independent perspective, because that's no different to how studios look at it. The only difference with studios is they've got large backings of financiers, venture capital firms that are willing to take the risk. And you kind of also go into the space of understanding how venture capital firms work, right? So one of the things that they will do is, if we are a group of venture capitalists that are sitting here, and I've invested in something that works, and I want to show to my backers where I got the money for the fund that everything is working and I can pay you back. I go to the other VCs and say, guys, don't you want to invest in this? It's working out this way for me. So when they invest, I get to pull out that money and I pay back. So paying back then gives proof that the sector works, these things work. So you do need a community of those investors to be in the same space.
100%. I mean, sorry, before you jump in here, so is there an opportunity for filmmakers to look at their business differently? To say, it's not just about me and a producer and a director sitting here and creating a story, but maybe I can pull in my service providers, or I can pull in somebody that really wants to stay with me the long term. And if I'm able to do this multi kind of format model, and I can pull in 300 million rands, as an example, could I then bring in, like, kind of lock in my service providers for a while and create that investment to be able to, is it something we should start looking at? It's not just looking at investment just for my little story and my slate and just the story side of it. Should we be expanding that conversation? I don't know if it's something that helps financiers.
Yeah, actually, you're quite correct. Actually, one of the things that I'm working on with our stakeholder relations guys is to start doing those, what they call them, the workshops around business thinking. Because people talk about skills development in this sector. From what I gather, the skills are there, the technical skills are there.
Yeah.
There might be shortages here and there. But the main skill that's very in short supply is a business skill, where we're saying, how do I create a going concern?
Sure.
With the stories that I tell, how do I create a thriving business that can outlive me as well?
Okay.
Because that governance structure starts attracting different type of financing.
Sure.
When we are able to say, I've got a slate of 10 films.
Right.
But what does it mean? Do I start with a concept, develop it, and get it all the way to production and distribution? Do I buy scripts that are ready and actually, produce them, or do I create scripts and sell them Because there are different models that you can follow
100%.
within the ecosystem for you to build. But also on our side, we realize that if we don't make certain decisions now, in 10 years we'll be sitting here having the same conversation.
Yeah, true.
Which is, we need to be very deliberate and say, I want to build 5 strong production houses in this country.
Okay.
And to say, but then how do we build those business models?
Right.
And once you build them, you need a very strong distribution system in the country.
Sure.
Then who are the triple A's that I can build in this country to make sure they've got the funding to build a global network that I can use? But most importantly, who can be my primary anchor as a country that will always test the concepts, whether bankable or not? That
Okay.
means you can't have an SABC failing. You have to recapitalize them so that they can
Right.
be that first platform where emerging filmmakers, non-bankable projects, but which have high cultural importance, can
Okay.
be shown on those platforms. Then you can build that value chain quite nicely, knowing that in 10 years' time, we always know that there is a clear system in South Africa of how to enter the market, how to monetize your process. But if we're not deliberate now about how we make that happen, we're pretty much just scratching the surface and we won't get anywhere. But there is a model that
There is a
allows
model that allows us
a
to.
businessman to make a going concern within the creative sector and make it bankable.
I mean, I don't know if you said business linking, so you're able to link different sectors of a business economy to be able to build this kind of new kind of, machine of a production company. So you kind of link in a different. Because I mean, I know. Sorry to cut you. I know you're going to cut in now. When I had applied at IDC to do some other projects, they had said, okay, fine. For instance, we have a marketing team in our book of businesses who can support your marketing efforts, right? So that's a linkage, which then starts to make sense because they have a very specific expertise. Then there was another. I think there was a finance management team that was part of the bouquet of businesses. Okay, fine. Hey, listen, let's link you. Is it something that starts in terms of the investment? Is it something that you guys are also still encouraging?
Yes, so I think one of the challenges we have, which is something we're working on, how we define filmmaking. Because all those incentives are there for everyone else except filmmaking.
Yeah.
Because we define filmmaking as a service. That means all the manufacturing incentives are not applicable to the sector. So, for example, IDC has a pre-investment intervention that they can do for you.
Yeah.
They've got post-investment implementation grants, but they apply to everyone except the services industry, which is where filmmaking sits.
Okay.
So what we've developed now, particularly for the youth fund, because we established a youth fund at the DFM, was to now, we found the money to help the young producers do their pilots.
Yeah.
So they can do a 5 to 7 minute pilot to help them with market access. To say that if they don't have history of converting stories into film, but then if they showed Mayenzeke a short film of how they look, how they present the concept, will that help them in accessing the market? That's the question we're interrogating now.
Sure.
Because we can't keep on saying, if you can't sell your thing, we can't invest in you, but we don't help you in your selling efforts. So we're trying to find ways of how do we help you activate the market? Because everyone else gets the money. Project finance, project preparation is there, except for just the services industry.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the truth, right? Is how people see us. They think we are lazy, don't want to have jobs. So that's basically how people see the industry. So I think, to the 2 points that Kagisho and Lehlohonolo made from a VC perspective, is, because we need to start seeing the industry as something to really grow. Because VCs needs to invest into a property that they know one day they can sell it for more money, right? Or their returns will be much bigger than what they put in. But also the creative way of financing is that, you almost have to prove that you've paid your money back. Now, there's many failures in our sector, purely from the basis that we do not have a base. You know, what Kagisho mentioned is that if you go anywhere in the world, each country has a base market. Either it's its public broadcaster or a mandate to be able to buy from content creators in that market. Whether you go to Europe, whether you go to North America, there's always a base platform or a broadcaster that can buy content for consumption, which we do not have here in South Africa. You know, with the SABC, as I said, its inability to be able to operate. And you have, you know, the multi-choices. But I think the key thing for me to that, we need to get that base, you know. So I'm glad that Kagisho says it's almost important to keep the SABC going. Because SABC is your base platform that you can use as a proof that there is a market or people to consume. At the same time, I think it's being able to say, because IDC is a very key player in the film and TV based perspective or in the creative sector, is how do you attract other similar financing parties to be able to look at the model and be able to create these entities that can have VCs coming in. It's almost like IDC could become the initial venture capitalist investment into these production. Like you said, you want to build 5 strong production companies and maybe 3 strong distribution entities. You know, so I think that's really for me is key. And I do know, I mean, honestly, I do know that from my perspective that IDC's intention on me is to see me growing to become a very strategic distribution entity. And we're working on different finance models. How do we finance and how do we help you to become a key player, mitigating these things, you know, to start having minimum guarantees that you can put into projects for specific markets. So I think for me, it's very key. What you said is how do you start to attract, if you think from a banking perspective, you know, if there's only one financer, it's going to be clogged with requests. It's almost make it difficult for IDC to be looking at all of them. But if there was a product line that's being created that you could go to almost any bank, each bank has a specific product for this sector, but who's going to define what that product will look like? The bank's risk mitigation are different from, of course, an entity that has a mandate, a government entity like IDC. But you could almost use IDC as a guarantee to go to all these different. So those are the models we need to use. And I mean, also from a slate perspective, to what they mentioned is that it's always a very like a safe thing to create. You know, coming from an agricultural perspective, as a farmer, even though I'm a beef breeder, I always have 5 hectares of potatoes, 5 hectares of cabbages, because if anything happens and there's a mad cow disease, I still need to be able to sell my potatoes, right, to keep the cash flow going. One of the greatest difficulties in our industry is cash flow. You know, people make a movie, it takes 5 years to raise financing. Except now, IDC is very fast, you can get your money quickly. But it takes 5 years, you know, to be able to raise money for a movie. But what are you eating in those times? And even once you've made the movie, there's a period of exploitation. You know, I always say to people, even though I have one of the biggest off-take agreements from the likes of Netflix, you know, I have paper with 300 to 500 million rands worth of paper, purely because these are pre-buys. But even though that has happened, the filmmakers' time from them to development and to production could take almost 18 to 24 months on this one project. But also then there's a broadcast time. So you almost 5 years just on one movie, and you never make any money. No one really quantified the time they put into really developing, producing, and selling. So if you think about it, no one really makes money in this industry.
Yeah.
So hence, when the bankers look at you, they're like, this is a waste of time. You know, and yes, Kagisho has the ability and the time to want to invest, but he can tell you, really no one makes money. If you to quantify the time. So that's why the model, of course, of Slate is very key, because you could almost be doing different properties at the same time. You know, you could be doing a feature film, an animation property, unscripted documentary, a scripted series. But at the base of it, we need IDC to help SABC to be on their feet, so that we have a platform where our projects can be bought and there's a mandate. I think it's the sort of developing stages of helping the industry. Because without that, we're always going to be lagging against guys who are far ahead of us. It's almost difficult to to run with Usain Bolt. There's no way. I mean, can you imagine me and Usain Bolt running together? It's not going to happen. It's the same. This is the same way as I will run with North American distributors or European distributors. It's like they're Usain Bolt, then it's me. But what does it take, to get to that point? So I think there is, and I'm glad, like I said, there are models that IDC is working on, and NFVF is also working on those models. But we almost need a collaborative space that can attract as well the extended financial sector. Because I can tell you, in North America, there are probably 4 or 5 banks that have a product. In Europe, there are a couple of banks outside the development bank, so which makes it much more easy to access this different type of product financing.
So, I mean, we're sitting here and I'm beginning to realize, I think, for the audience that in order for us to talk about the investment within the rest of the value chain, it does start with making sure that producers have enough money to make the films, right? For them to change their strategy and to look at how their film production strategy is. Because at the end of the day, if they don't have the money to come in, there's no way that a Canon, that Gerard is going to start investing all of his cameras in this country or in this continent. So is it really about how the producer then packages his business? I mean, my question to you, Kagisho, is what do you believe would made those films that are now establishing an ROI? You spoke about 2 films, 2 or 3 films at the top of the conversation. What is it about those films or those content items that actually started the ROI? Is it the distribution that they have in the US? They have lots and lots of eyeballs and lots of cinemas. Is it because of that, or is it something else that you feel?
It's a number of things. And I say again, producers are at different levels. So the ones who were able to produce in the US spent more than $20 million of their own money creating this content. So it's a different ball game altogether.
Sure.
So then the investment committee doesn't think twice. The guy has already put in a lot of his money.
So
he can't afford to lose it. So I can do it. The other one had already put in here a lot of his money as well, pre-sold the content, had all the DTI approvals.
Sure.
And we were just bridging the gap for him. Right? So the risk profile is also different.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, you can't use them as a benchmark because they are more on the extreme end of the industry.
Sure.
But somewhere in the middle there is an opportunity to allow producers to have ongoing work. Hence now I'm starting to focus a lot on series as well.
Sure.
Because it's something that keeps a producer going over an extended period of time.
Right.
Versus just doing one feature, going through the whole 5-10-year trauma of producing one film every 10 years. And you're like, but after 30 years, the guy it's still called emerging because he has 3 films.
Yeah.
So he'll never be bankable in his whole career as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
So those are the issues that we are trying to fix, to say, and there's a conflict between trying to build an industry and doing transactions.
Okay.
Because a transaction, one producer has one film, it's an amazing story. Oh my gosh, we need to put money into this thing. But it's just one project. Right?
Yeah.
But on the other side, you've got a platform, a base platform like SABC that requires massive resources to get right. And that won't happen overnight. It will take you a year or 2 to fix it. But once you fix it, then you fix the industry for good. But now being able to prioritize your resources between the 2 demands becomes it's your daily struggle to say, but this guy needs the money.
Yeah.
But hey, if I don't fix the system, he will need the money again this year, next year. So you're not fixing his long-term problems. So trying to prioritize between, and sometimes I always remind my team, that's what they call as industrial development. We must move the industry as a whole, where we say now this industry is self-sustainable. You've got banks that can put money in the industry. We saw an interesting model in France, where you've got a government agency that does the initial investment but doesn't take security.
Okay.
Because they leave the security available for the banks, so they can play in there. And you know what the impairment rate is?
No.
It was less than 10% without taking security. So there is a way of creating unique solutions for industry, but it comes down to the political will as well.
Sure. So, I mean, you've got people, within our value chain who rely on the story, but the story almost relies on them as well. So we've got equipment houses and people saying, I'm going to run to NEF and I'm going to get funding because they have funding, 250,000 rands maybe for equipment funding. Are we lacking in that area of investment? Are there spaces for us to look at the value chain investment in location managers and location scouts, investment in unit management, supplies? Are we, where else can we start to find those pockets to invest? Because also even with things like trailers, my goodness, everyone knows there's only one set of really good trailers, and they happen to be in Cape Town. Now you go around the rest of the world, it's caravans. Literally, you got little bondoki caravan situations, but yet you've got these films that come in and they say, if you don't have a trailer, forget it, I don't want to come. Those are areas that need. But how do we go and start proving that we it's viable for me to go out and buy 10 trailers? How do we start proving that? Anyone?
So maybe to quantify, there's three types of ways in this. There's what's called the independent sector.
Yes.
There's the services sector, and the what's owned sector, right? Is what the broadcasters create for themselves. They will always find money for that,
Okay.
right? And every supporting structure there will always work. And there could be, of course, certain things directed towards that. So that works. When you go home now, you open a TV, there's something to watch, right?
Yes, sir.
There's something on SABC, there's something on ETV, there's something on MultiChoice, there's something on Netflix. So for what they make for themselves will always exist. And it doesn't really matter how much it costs for them, they will make those products. Because they've got different ways of generating revenue for themselves.
Right.
So all the other supporting structure, whether it be trailers or catering, will always exist. Of course, it can always be directed so that it maintains a specific demographics of the country. Then there's what I say is the services sector, which is based on cars coming here or people from here where you have the Hollywood studios shooting here or independents shooting here, just you will provide a service. So that's where I think sometimes our industries has always been looked at from that services perspective. Yes, that also is dictated by how much incentive, or some of them is based on skill set. So that services sector also supports, like you said, all the different entrepreneurs around, whether it's trailers, whether it's post, whether it's catering, any other, it supports that. Now, without a lucrative independent sector or a sector that works, the industry is almost dead, because that's where you can start to value IP. So IP and what we call an asset in other industries. A farmer, your land is your asset, or what you go is an asset, what the bank can hold. That is based on that. It's based on the independent sector. The biggest struggle in our industry is the independent sector. Now you have the NFVF supporting the independent sector. You have the IDC support. That's where, for me, the biggest struggle is. And that independent sector can only work if it has a market to sell its products to.
Okay.
So, like in any other industries, so this for me is our biggest struggle, because the reason the independent sector, again, is not growing because we haven't managed to find what it means to value the assets it creates. Whether it's generated from the mind, from the paper, once you can value what that looks like and be able to build an asset book, or what Kagisho will say, give me a balance sheet. I mean, who's got a great balance sheet? No one, right? So a balance sheet that I can finance against. So that's where, for me, I think we need to be able to figure out the models. But also the independent sector, which almost is always small businesses.
Yeah.
Job creation and employment, we know SMMEs create the best jobs.
Yeah.
Big corporations can change, things could be AI, but the SMMEs, because these are small little companies who always rely on each other.
Right.
So in any instance, you need to be able to support your small, medium enterprises, because those are the ones who could become that. Like, I can almost, if I'm making as an SMME 5 or 3 movies, a series, and I can know who's going to provide my trailers, my kit. So that's where the jobs really are created the most, within the SMEs. And the SMEs are always in the independent sector.
Okay.
So I think for me, that's where I think in order for us to be able to make it work on the supporting structure, we need to be able to fix this one part of how do we find a platform to support the independent sector, the sector that can create a product that you can value. Until you can value that property and be able to have a strong independent sector, 10 years down the line, I can tell you, we're going to be here and we're going to be talking the same thing. You know, we said that in 1994, in 2004, in 2014. So every 10 years, it's always going to be this. Now we're going to, luckily we've got, Kagisho who's got the intention, but as long as he's still at the IDC, and he wants to make it work, then we need to be able to figure out how best to service the independent sector and allow it to be able to create valuable properties. So.
And I think one of the things that definitely I'd like to circle back to is obviously the funding is there. We speak about funding being there, but one of the biggest challenges within the sector is proving that the market is there to back up why that funding should be released to go into the particular project that you're looking at. So in the business of trailers, what I like about what Mayenzeke said is that then we have to look at who are the biggest pullers of crews and cast in terms of the industry that we have. So you'd approach those types of individuals to say, listen, I'm working on something like this. They might give me access to actually be able to service you with these particular types of equipment. Would you give me a letter of intent to then say you would access these services? Because then what you come back with is proof of market and what they would ordinarily term an anchor client. You either have anchor client or you've come back with a demand letter. So there is demand that is there. So you use that in the absence of any other data that can support that there is a market for this. You actually have companies that are well known that are already pulling some of these services or that are doing jobs to that scale. Then it becomes easier to then say, I can go to the smaller than production companies to say, here's a service that I'm bringing to the market. Would you be interested in renting from this? That's where you then work out your profitability model to say, for the internationals or the service companies, here's what I'd likely be looking at, but for the locals, here's what I need to charge. And this is by roughly, you can then start working out to say, it might take this long before I'm able to pay off. That's then you're feeding into the questions they would have in the absence of such data. That data is then used to say, is it a risk we can take? Instead of buying you 5 trailers, let's start you off with 3 and give you the same time period we would have in the 5, and let's see whether the model can actually pay out. So some of these things just require a little bit of, I suppose, creativity and a willingness to, I'll go for less if you can't do the full amount, because we just need to unlock it. Even if government does see some of these things at times, it's not easy to play in that space, because then if government plays in the space, we take away the opportunity. If government pushes it too hard, it's the moment we kind of put our foot off the gas, who did we select to sit on that? Oh yeah, they're playing favorites. So we see them, but it's not a space we can necessarily play in. So we wait for the market to bring these ideas to the fore.
I'm sure there's questions in the room. If there are any questions, please let us know now. We can have a microphone. Oh, look at that. Okay, can we get a microphone, please? Microphone. Sorry, thanks. There's a lady here. There's a gentleman at the back there. There's a young man this side. So, yeah, the lady in front there. Yeah, please stand up and do your question. Say your name and your question. Thanks.
Afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for all the information that you've shared today. My question is around marketing and market building, right? Because you've spoken about proof of concept being a part of being able to get funding. But I wanted to understand if there are any efforts put towards actually building a market for something. Because we can argue that we're losing the market or the audience in movie theaters. But even when we weren't, I don't think local films had as much of a pull as international films. And so what we would think would be that, okay, what can we pump into marketing in order to pull people into theaters to watch local films? And I'm saying this because now I'm in a position as a young creative with other creatives who are like, okay, how can we create spaces for ourselves where we can share our work and we can sort of contribute to our efforts so that we can at least have 3 or 4 of us screening our work and making some sort of money out of that and bringing other creatives into the space or funders or whoever who can see what we do and sort of have our own little like DFM sort of to speak. So I wanted to understand if that's something that you have considered and if it is worth considering.
Okay, let's take the other question. So it's about marketing and creating a space to promote, okay?
So I just want to add to what Mayenzeke was talking about, supporting small businesses. My name is Johnny from the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. But the question that I have is, who do we make these things for, right? From a South African perspective, what is being made here? We are making it for South Africa, we are making it for South Africans, or we are actually making it for the continent. In 2019, Minister Nathi Mthethwa spoke about the future of the South African film industry, the South African Film Summit. And he said the future of the South African film industry lies in our ability to collaborate with the BRICS nations. I disagreed with him respectfully. I said, no, we have nothing in common with Brazil, with Russia, India, China, nothing in common at all. But we have got so much in common with countries surrounding South Africa. So what you're making in South Africa, you need to make it for the continent. So there is Sesotho spoken in Lesotho, and Setswana in Botswana, and there's Bapela in Zimbabwe, and there's... So that is, for me, the future of the film industry, whether we're talking about funding from government. And I think maybe the problem for South Africa is that there is just too much money. So when there's so much money, people, creatives, don't create enough. Why then do you see a nation that has nothing doing so much? I'm talking about Nigeria now. Nigeria has nothing. All of this we're talking about here doesn't exist, and you know that, right?
Yeah.
Why are they creating something that's sustainable for years and years and years? And there is so much money here, yet there's nothing. So people with nothing do something, people with something do nothing. It is a mindset thing. But what is being made here, I'll give you an example and I'll sit down. In 2016, I made a film in Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese, I speak French. That film was made in South Africa with students from UJ, not far from here.
Sure.
But the community from Angola that has never seen itself on screen in South Africa appreciated the effort, and they were willing to put money on the table. Botswana is setting up a film commission. Azania spoke about it now. They go to America to bring a Steve Harvey to help them when just next door world-class infrastructure exists. So as long as South Africa does not, number one, believe that it is an African nation, that it is actually in Africa, it has to look out for these other nations. We will have the same conversations for the next 20 years, turning in circles, actually spending 4 years in the desert when it can take 5 days. Sure. So who are we making this content for? Is it for Hollywood or is it for the African continent? That's the question that you guys sitting over there can maybe answer. Thank you.
All right, cool. So I think, no, go ahead, right? Give him his flowers. I think what that comes down to is, and I've got the marketing question. I think it's about that collaborative effort, right? Because people say that we don't really have an industry. We're like 52 million people or so, and of that 52, maybe how many thousand are making films, right? So our industry is made up of thousands of people rather than millions of people. Whereas in other continents, they are continents that are a collective, like the Americas, it's one big landmass of people. What strategies, and maybe you can help here, there are funding agencies like the African banks who are working quite broadly across our continent. Is there opportunity to do collaborative investments, to be able to build storylines, to be able to then attract different kinds of audiences? Because again, it comes down to the story and the producer. If they ask for money, the rest of the value chain eats. If they don't ask for money, the value chain doesn't eat because there's no value chain that exists. What are the investment strategies that reach beyond the borders of any of any country that you guys know of? And I think maybe Lehlohonolo, then Mayenzeke.
Look, I think one of the key strategies that even the NFVF started long ago was looking into co-productions. So the whole idea around co-productions was to try and create two local markets
Sure.
using different jurisdictions. But obviously, what the biggest challenge that has been there, I think, within the SADC region is that the industries had never developed to a point where there was an alleviation of the budgetary requirements from the local filmmaker and an industry that had a network of cinemas or broadcasters that were strong enough to actually take on that content.
Sure.
So that has been some of the challenges that has led to there being no co-production with local African regions. But conversations had started, and there was an agreement with the likes of your Algeria.
Sure.
There are conversations with the likes of your Egypt. There are conversations with Nigeria.
Sure.
But because the sector hasn't grown from where government support and government policies stand, where South Africa is, there hasn't been that match up to say we can actually match up and guarantee that when we put this co-production in place, we can actually drive for there to be cooperative work.
Sure.
So you end up with you end up with countries that we've had co-production treaties with that are more mature. So we've got
Okay.
treaties with the UK, with France, with Australia, with Canada, and normally every so often they come with between the NFVF and the NFVF's counterpart in these countries. They'll then say, let's co-fund, let's actually get producers engaging a little more.
Okay.
Maybe they haven't engaged a lot.
Okay.
So that's really part of how you try to build a market outside of just your own economy. And one of the challenges that we do have is economic, socio-economic. We know that we haven't had cinemas in key places, key townships that we grew up in, key townships in big provinces. And the absence of that has limited how far films could reach there. So it then said there's a need to then open up other markets so that we can come back and prove the business case that the sector does make money.
Right.
So in the absence of some of those entries into our own local market not being strong enough to actually carry a big enough story to say a local filmmaker can go out to the market and say, I managed to sell 8 million tickets in my home country with the same film. You're not able to then on-sell it in that way because our numbers in terms of cinema were sitting in the, I think, upper hundreds of thousands. It hadn't crossed 1 million. And if it does cross 1 million in terms of viewership, that's when you've got repeat visitors to the same cinema. So we haven't had a strong enough market to say we are actually showing that our own local market has enough power to say we can then use that as a gauge for anyone else that wants to partner with South Africa. So some of the challenges there are still very prevalent.
Sure.
And threatened now by the fact that you've got streaming platforms. So we can't necessarily compete with anyone can just pay a single fee and
Yeah.
they've got access to this library for the month.
Yeah.
Versus, So the challenges keep, almost the ball game keeps shifting.
Yeah.
And we are left trying to see how do we then catch up with it. And the only way we can catch up is part of the role that I feel is looking at partnerships.
Sure.
To say we need to build partnerships that speak to how do we get content into certain places? How do we then speak to the SABCs, the IDCs,
Sure.
and the AAAs to say, what do you guys see as happening and affecting the market, and where do we come in as a developmental institution? Is there an opportunity for us to come in? Is there an opportunity for us to assist?
Sure.
So obviously we've got grants and incentives that look at if a filmmaker or a distributor is going out to sell content, we would then assist with flights, we assist with accommodation, we assist with an allowance to make sure that when you get there, you're actually just busy with the business of selling.
Sure.
So sell your content, sell as much as you can. We're not going to say we're experts. As Kagisho said, we do a lot of reading. We take what we've read, we compare what markets look like, and we come back and say, here's the policy or here's the grant that we might need.
Sure.
But we leave it to the industry to say, go sell.
Sure.
And that's where you kind of see that there's a lot of strong filmmakers, but we don't have an equivalent number of strong entrepreneurs that are then there to support this. And I think that's what speaks to the question you had to say, what happens if you were able to cluster
Yeah.
into something, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you look at a cluster to say, let's take the range of strong filmmakers that have good stories,
Yeah.
but then you're teaming them up with people that can package, entrepreneurs that can actually package
Right.
all these ideas and can approach an IDC to say, within this cluster that we operate in, we are a group of 20, 30 filmmakers, and we've got content of so many films, documentaries, TV series, and we're looking to then raise the capital for this.
Right.
They might open up access to a revolving credit facility
Right.
to say, we would approve you only up to a certain point. I don't know if you actually do them. Sorry if I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah,
there.
no.
Okay. So they could open up that revolving credit facility, and you could literally just chomp it in by saying, here's how we are with these productions, so we need that disbursement to come in now.
100%.
Over those ones, then you have distributors that are then able to sit in because their time is now not being pulled in for free. They're
Yeah.
actually part of this value chain. They're being
Yep.
paid for their time.
Yep.
Then they're able to come in as the productions are being made to say, no, for these markets where we know local content can work,
Right.
here's what you need to adjust, here's what you need to shift.
Right.
Because I think it becomes thoroughly unfair to expect a filmmaker that has come up with a creative concept to suddenly understand how a foreign market is going to work. So we
yeah, of
need to
course.
have that value chain that then sits in and says, here are the people that we're bringing in at every step. At that point where you've gotten to, we now need to market it, you get a group of marketers. A group of marketers who deal with nothing else but to say, on all of these content, our job is to make sure it reaches, based on what the distributors have said, based on what the filmmaker wants, based on what trailers we have. And even to advise to say, here's the type of trailer we need.
Sure.
And we know for sure this market, it'll work for this, that in that market, it'll work like this. You shift it around. And where do you see that? In some of the films, like Pearl Harbor, that came out of the US, the trailers were not the same in every region. What we saw is not the same as what was seen in Asia.
Right.
It had to be adjusted. The posters that are sent out adjust along the way. We saw something like that happen with Paradise Stop from a local market, where the poster that we have of Paradise Stop was very different to the poster they put up when they went to the UK.
100%.
But it came with understanding. It didn't
Of
just
what the
come with a
market-
trial and error element, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, that then dovetails into her question in terms of what is out there in terms of supporting the marketers to be able to support this value chain. Is there funding? I mean, I don't know if you guys still give marketing funding. I know it's the marketing fund to send people halfway across the world, but actual stock standard, marketing, above the line marketing strategies, through the line marketing strategies, below the line marketing strategies, digital marketing, those kind of things. Is there funding available? And even in that, in the infrastructure of that kind of space, I don't know. I mean, Mayenzeke, this is your area. In order for you to distribute, you need a marketing team, right? Or you need strong communicators. What is out there in the world that we could replicate here?
Yeah, it's something I learned today that you do give money to me to go to the market. So I'm gonna go to the NFVF for money. There's two questions that are being posed, and I wanna answer both of them because they're related without being political. And and the reason I say that because is oftentimes, if you go to Europe, there is no borders, except now they've created Brexit, which is create another border. So the trading makes it easy
Sure.
to go from one country to another.
Sure.
And that's intentional. If North America has been divided into states. If you think about it, it could have been different countries with different borders. And it's something that happened a long time ago. If you look at Asia, it's almost like one of our difficulties, political will as well as just trading blocks from an African perspective, to your point, is who you creating the product for. In the farming business, I used to move chicken from South Africa to Lesotho, to Zaire, to different countries. The logistical nightmare of going from border to border was insane. Now there's this free trade agreement that's happening that we need to tap into because it allows us as an entrepreneur to be able to trade. Now, story is story, regardless where you are. And it travels. The Koreans make great stories that's being watched here. So the audience taste, sometimes we do not know as the creators. And the audiences can watch whatever they want to watch, depending what's being brought to them. So why, that guy's point was like, why South Africans feel like they're not creating something for Africa, but they want to create stuff for the world. My point is that, of course, South Africa has an infrastructure, But South Africans themselves, I get content all over the continent through these different platforms. But South Africans themselves, I think they're starting to find their voice and the genres that works. Because, they've had 30 years of democracy. Before that, everything was dictated to them or restricted by infrastructure. So Nigeria, we could get DVDs and VHS that was brought to us to be able to love some of the Nollywood content. But that market was driven by the intention for the distributors to be able, there's many theories, but also one of them is to push VHS because that's what was used to record different things. So we could really get used to you could find that content anywhere on the street, DVDs, pirated, even though it was pirated, but also it gave us a taste of what that content was in order for us to be able to enjoy it. Now, South African infrastructure and movement is always dictated by those who have the platform.
Sure.
The SABC or the multi-choices. And South Africa had the first satellite broadcasting, infrastructure, which allowed it to be able to blast its network throughout different parts and using their storyline.
Right.
But whoever owned that infrastructure dictated what stories needs to go out.
Right.
Because stories have a way of changing and impacting things, right? Politically and socially. So there's a lot of underlying issues that allow us not to be able to get our stories through right infrastructure throughout the continent.
Sure.
Firstly, from a perspective of, in order to be able to make stuff that we like, you gotta be able to work with that market. So to what Lehlohonolo said is that let's say with Europe, we have these co-production treaties that allow South Africans and Europeans to be able to co-produce, to co-create something, which means from the beginning you have two people who understand their market to be able to tell their people this is the products we're creating. Now, whoever came up with the policy that spoke to those co-production had an intention. And if I were to say my brothers in Cote d'Ivoire, in Zaire, or in Nigeria, I relate to them more than I relate to the guy who sits in the UK from a culture perspective. But there isn't infrastructure that allows us to do that.
Sure.
To get to Nigeria today, to get a visa, it's a problem. To get to some of the countries within the continent have visa free, but also it's still very difficult.
Sure.
So there's all these logistical things that become a stumbling block. Now, if there were no logistic, the internet's supposed to become that infrastructure that allows us to be able to tell our stories. So all I'm trying to say is, it's not as easy as we think it should be, even though the people on the other side of the border looks like me. There are intention and infrastructure for us not to unite and be one.
Okay.
So that's really my point, because that's at the surface of everything. It's easy for me to be able to take my content and sell it to a European broadcaster because there's an infrastructure that buys my content, regardless of what the value of that product is, because it's going to be devalued because it's not what they're looking for.
Sure.
It's not something they can relate to. It's a nice to have.
Sure.
So for me, that's really the key, something to be really cognizant about. But I can tell you, of course, the streamers came in, broke the barrier to a certain degree because it created an infrastructure that allows you, as if YouTube didn't exist, right? But the streamers came in, created this infrastructure that allows to give a certain value. But also you must understand, the streamers only want to create subscribers. So whatever intention they put in, if it doesn't meet their subscriber base, there's not going to be a will to even grow that.
Sure.
They haven't even scratched the surface of banking the African market.
100%.
So we are probably even less than 5%
Got it.
of the people that sits on the streaming platforms. So all I'm trying to say is, of course, there is a market within the continent, but it needs this different way of infrastructure. You cannot value it. There's a certain value created from a global platform streaming perspective, but whether it's at the right value, it's something yet to be seen. So that's really my without really getting deep into politics.
Sure.
But I think we need to be able to to break those barriers.
100%.
Yeah.
So I think just an important shot because we have to break now. Kagisho, from your point of view, the below the line spend, where are the opportunities for somebody to say, I want funding to be able to build and capacitate this part of the below the line part of the value chain. I'm not talking about film funding. It's about somebody who says, I want to be able to position myself such that those monies that are being collected by through all these slates and all these strategies, they can come to me and I have the capacity to be able to support or service that person.
In our funding strategy, we made room for that already,
Okay.
because the 3 pillars of our strategy is around content creation,
Sure.
which is the hardest part to finance because you can't touch and feel,
You can't.
but it's the driver of everything.
Exactly.
But we have infrastructure as well. Under infrastructure, we're looking at sound stages,
Sure.
camera equipment, the trucks,
Yeah.
anything that's more like more capex, as they call it, capex.
Okay.
Yeah, things that people can touch and feel. They're actually easier to finance than film itself.
By far.
The only challenge is that the business case for it has to be well articulated to show how you're going to secure the market, people who are going to use that equipment. So we already made room for that in the
Okay, good,
structure,
good.
for people to be able to build those businesses as alternatives, because you can't
Wow.
be in a country where you have 2 dominant camera companies.
Yeah.
You know, you only
doesn't
have
work.
3 or 4 van rentals. I mean, things as basic as ablution facilities.
Yeah. Exactly.
Those individual businesses, that's where the SMME story comes
Yeah.
in, that you can actually finance those people.
Sure.
But they're really not forthcoming.
Oh, so we're actually saying to everyone here that, you know what, go into those spaces, and, you know, if you've got 1,000 trash cans you want to buy, you know, because everyone needs a bin, right? I mean, we need simple things. We can actually say, I want to be able to supply these things, IDC support me, and then go out to market and then say, I have 1,000 or 5,000 trash cans and I can distribute them around the country. Obviously, that means I need drivers, I need, you know, cleaners, the whole value chain of that one bin. Then IDC can essentially support that. That's really encouraging. I mean, there are a lot of unit managers that are out there just trying to find ways in which they can really start capacitating how they service the industries in that. From an NFF point of view, just some parting shots. When you talk about risk mitigation financing, must we also look at the NFF money as that, or is that actually that's more investment in story? But how else can we manage this risk, and how else because there are bankers listening in and wanting to understand this thing, what would you say are the places where they can manage their risk best within this film value chain? Is it literally the bin structure, the trash cans, or is it something else where they can kind of put their foot in and say, okay, fine, this is going to work?
Sure, that's a difficult question. It's not a parting shot, it's a burial. Look, I don't know per se, outside of not having physical experience in the sector.
Sure.
But what one looks at is every service that the sector does need has an opportunity to kind of position itself to say, do it well, be great at it, then the likelihood of your services being acquired for that particular skill set that you bring to the table are much higher. At the same time, it's a when you're looking at risk mitigation, one always looks at, you've got your incentives, you've got the grants, and NFVF and the other film commissions, those become your risk mitigation factors, because as you're trying to raise capital from private investors or banks or other institutions that require you to actually pay back, you can actually say, I've reduced my risk by this portion, or here's where I'm reducing it, here's where the incentive comes in. And why I advocate for, look at the incentive as something you use to entice your investors, not necessarily something you use in the production. If they have it to give it to you, then you repackage that with the Section 12O to say, should there be any losses, the SARS says they'll give you some of this money back. So the incentive, as it comes out, I'll give you an initial payment, which then buys me back my equity instead of using it in the production. Here's the investment portion of the investment that you brought in. DTIC has given it to the production for free, so I'm giving it back to you. So I buy back some of that equity. Then you can run. By then you've made your film.
Yeah.
DTIC, yes, does have delays in terms of when they do pay out, and that's been one of the biggest challenges. But when they do pay out, you know that that's money you're not paying back. With NFVF, it's a limited budget, and even though there's a clawback element to it, it's only based on whether or not you've actually produced something successful. It actually made an income.
Sure.
But if it hadn't, because of the way NFVF is structured, it's not necessarily money that's going to put you out. Assets are not necessarily going to be attached because your project didn't return enough value. Because at the end of the day, NFVF still sits as developmental in nature, and its mandate is to develop.
Happiness.
So the partnerships that we then have, and even the coming about of Section 12.0 was actually driven by the NFVF when it was introduced. And that was part of the partnerships, the length of partnerships that the NFVF then tries to unlock for the sector. So those are the two, the incentives and grants and your tax incentives, Section 12.0. The third is the co-production space, because with co-productions, it then says you've got a co-producer that's as invested as you are, and they're bringing a portion of that budget. What portion of that budget they bring in is highly dependent on what the budget was and how you negotiate. But that becomes your risk mitigation. And that risk mitigation has an added element that you can make it someone else's responsibility, or rather you share the responsibility of raising the capital for that production.
Got it.
So those are the three that are active and available today.
Cool. Part in short, Mayenzeke, for me, it is that moment of when someone sits down and they're not at home, but they sit down somewhere else in a theater. Where does the investment need to sit? Should we be plowing and supporting the streamers to come in and bringing them in and inviting them in? Because ultimately, that's the subscription model, right, for the streamers. It's a good model. It's not a bad model. But the other part of it, for you, part in short, where does the investment need to sit as the exhibition and distribution space?
Yeah, I think also for people to understand that distribution is not the end part. Because oftentimes people think of it later once they've already made their project or they've already thought of the idea. You know, I always tell people that every day I sit with buyers all over, they tell me what slots are available and what those slots are. You know, firstly, let's fix the SABC. Number two, let's fill the slots based on the audience needs. Oftentimes as creators, we are not aware of the audience's needs. It's like, it's difficult for me to feed vegetarians with meat. You know, I can't force them to eat meat because they're vegetarians, right? Yeah. So even in the content creation, we have to think like that. Is, you know, what do they want? Let's fill those slots. Number two, then let me go to the township and feed them asparagus. Now, asparagus is a very fancy vegetable, right? People want potatoes and but it's still a good vegetable.
Yeah.
So once they've eaten vegetables and stuff, they feel like they can taste and love asparagus and they see the value, then they'll pay more for it. So that's really my approach, is that let's fix the SABC thanks to our IDC so that we have a base market. Number two, let's fill the slots that already exist because that's what the audience wants to eat. Number two, then let's package, let's see it this way. You do not go create if you don't know if there's a market. Even if you have a great idea, there are genres that work. There's what people want to do from a global perspective. Global means Africa to the world. So let's have an approach of bringing distribution early on, because that also dictates the value from a financing perspective. Right? You can attract the investment.
Got it. So I think we've run out of time completely. Thank you so much. It's evident that at the end of the day, if the story doesn't exist, then the value chain doesn't exist, right? And in that value chain, for the businesses out there, it's not just, and if students in the room, it's not just about being a producer. It's not just about being a director. Please, and I jest in the trash can example, but my goodness, every single set in this world needs a trash can, right? So it's about looking at that from a unit manager's point of view Also, in terms of relocations as well, is how we're marketing them and how we're using them, because that brings back different kinds of revenues into our economies as well. So it's about looking at that value chain and seeing where you can actually find space to be able to add value to a content, and then be bold enough to pick up the call or write an email to Kagisho and say, you know what, I'm not sure about this, but I would really love to get some support in this area. He can say one of two responses, yes or no. Right? And that is where investment starts to happen. But thank you so much to my team. Thank you, Kagisho. Thank you, Lehlohonolo. Thank you, Mayenzeke, for this amazing conversation.
Thank you, Azza. Thank you, Azza.
Cool.